Welcome to the Design Thinker podcast, where we explore the theory and practice of design. Hosted by me, Donnie, and
me, Peter.
Danny, how are you?
I am good. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, yes. Go on, nervous with anticipation.
Yes. We have alluded to this in a previous episode that today Peter's going to be in the hot seat.
Yeah, it's my turn.
So I usually ask you what we're talking about today.
Okay, well, shall we flip things around entirely? Danny, my turn to ask you, what are we talking about today?
So Peter, today we're going to be talking about the lessons you learned in skydiving that apply to business.
Okay. Okay.
So, for those of you that may not be aware, Peter is a master skydiver.
I've done lots of skydiving. I don't know if this technical term that is master skydiver, but I've done lots of jumping out of airplanes. I haven't done any for quite a long time, but for quite a long time I did quite a lot. So, yeah. I think I was described as an experienced skydiver. That would be what I'd call it.
So Peter is an experienced skydiver. To the point, just want to put this in a perspective that non-skydiving people will understand. So when you start skydiving, you usually jump with someone on your back. But you have skydived enough that they just let you jump off by yourself.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And actually, that tandem skydive where, for the most part, and certainly in New Zealand, that's the way that almost everybody does their first ever skydive or parachute jump. I've never done one of those. I've only ever jumped out of an airplane by myself. And I did my first parachute jump, as it was technically not a skydive, long enough ago that it was what's called static line. So it was jumping out of an airplane with a round parachute on my back and a reserve on my front, and the parachute was attached to the inside of the airplane, and as I fell away from the airplane it detached automatically and opened automatically, so I literally just had to fall out, which, as it turns out, was a good thing to begin with.
Because I imagine that first jump, you're probably going to forget to pull the cord.
Well, should we get into it? Shall I tell you the stories? I mean, that is definitely a story, but we can come to that if you want. Where do you want to start?
So let's start with, I want to know, how did you get into...
Yeah.
How did you become a skydiver?
How did I get into skydiving? Well, this is not unusual, but it might sound very surprising, and hopefully it's interesting, but I'm actually scared of heights. If I'm on top of a tall building or on a cliff edge or near a cliff edge, I'm not great, and I'm especially not great if there's other people around me. So I just have a fear of, probably not fear of heights, but a fear of falling. So I've always had that. I first really encountered it when my dad took me and one of my brothers, to see a soccer football game, and we were quite high up in the stadium, and I was not happy. So I was pretty scared about that, and I got the same feeling over and over again in my childhood, going to concerts or theatres. And what I did do when I was in my early teens, I joined in Britain what's called the Air Cadets, or the Air Training Corps, because I was, despite my fear of heights, I was always interested in the airplanes, interested in anything that flew. I'm not sure if I think when I was a really small child, I might have been in an airliner, but I'd never been in a small airplane up to that point. So I joined the Air Cadets, and one of the things you got to do in Air Cadets was go flying in small planes. And that was with the Royal Air Force at the time. And we flew in tiny little single-engined propeller, a Chipmunk. We used to go once every month or a couple of months to an RAF station, and every time we went, we would have to get a safety briefing, and part of that safety briefing was watching a video and it was like a public service video from the 1970s, old school haircuts, and it was a military thing. It was very precise instructions. It told you exactly what to do to put your parachute on before you got on the airplane. And it was one of these old style ones where the parachute was under your bum, so you'd be hunched over walking out of the airplane. It told you how to get in the airplane, how to be strapped into the airplane, what to do, what not to do. And part of the video briefing was what to do in an emergency. And one of the emergencies that you might encounter, but very rarely, unusually, but it would be if the plane broke down in such a way that you would need to get out of the plane while it was flying in the air and actually use the parachute. So it would tell you everything. It would tell you the instructor or the pilot will slide the cockpit canopy back. Your job is to keep it going. You have to undo the seat harness, but not the parachute harness, and you have to stand up, and you should dive over the back of the wing. At this point, everyone's kind of starts to chuckle as if the plane's going to be flying straight and level, just ready for you to jump off the back of the wing. You're probably going to get flung out, and as it's tumbling towards the earth in some disaster. But what made us chuckle even more was that was pretty much the end of the safety video. They never actually said in the safety video that you should look for the silver handle that's on your parachute harness and pull it, because that's the thing that's actually going to save your life. So
it's not just wearing the parachute. You actually have
that's
to.
not going to say. I mean, it's like a soft cushion on your bum, but that's, unless you actually pull a ripcord. So that always made us laugh. But what I discovered was I actually loved, even though I was scared of heights, I really adored flying of any kind. But I was always curious about, could I, if the worst did happen, could I actually jump out of this airplane and save my own life? So there was that. I remember when I was growing up, we lived between our house and the supermarket that my mum would do the shopping at on a Saturday morning. There happened to be a parachute centre. I always remember driving past that parachute centre on a Saturday morning and seeing these parachutes come down next to the motorway, these kind of umbrella jellyfish things. People will be familiar with the round parachutes if you've ever watched an old school army film. And I thought, that looks interesting. I wonder if I could do that. So, loved flying, didn't like heights, curious about whether I could actually use a parachute in an emergency situation, had seen people actually doing it, floating nicely down toward the ground. All of that went through my mind in a very short period of time, maybe a split second. It was like a fast forward movie. And that happened, that fast forward movie happened when I was about to leave the university sports club freshers fair. So I'd gone to university and was about to start studying aerospace engineering, like designing airplanes. We come back to that part of the story. And before I'd even, what was called in those days in Britain, matriculation, before I'd officially become a student, I went looking for something to do at the weekends. I was actually looking for the men's field hockey team, but I wandered around the inside of this building. It happened to be an old church, so I'm kind of walking around this old church. There's tables and people signing freshers up to join their sports club, and there's rugby, and there's soccer, football, and there's Dungeons and Dragons and chess and all sorts of things that some people's minds are pushing the limits of what a sport is. And what there wasn't was a men's field hockey team, so nothing really caught my attention apart from that. I kind of made my mind up that I'd need to find something else to do at the weekend. And I was about to leave this old church building, and if you imagine, it's autumn in Scotland. Despite that, it was a sunshiny day outside, and I'm looking out of this old Victorian sandstone building, lots of hubbub behind me, and I can kind of see the quiet street out in front of me through this arched church door. And I heard a voice behind me. It happened to be a female voice, but I heard the voice saying to me, "Excuse me, would you like to do a parachute jump?" And the fast forward movie started playing in my mind. I was like, well, the honest answer to that would be, I have thought about it. And I started turning around. And then I stopped turning around, and I saw in front of me was a table with a couple of parachutes on it, a video on a really small TV playing of somebody falling through the sky with a parachute on their back, and two people, women, sitting manning this table. And I said, well, actually, the last thing went through my mind before I responded to them. The last thing that went through my mind was, Mum's going to kill me. Because then I said, yes, I would like to do a parachute jump, actually. Got better to do weekends. And it turned out you could even better than being able to do a parachute jump, you could actually do it for essentially free. That the way that the University Parachute Club worked was that they would raise money for charity, and they had a deal with the Parachute Club. If you raised enough money for charity, you could do your first jump for nothing. So that's what I ended up doing. So fast forward, I think it was, it was only a few weeks before I went to the Parachute Club and did my training, but it was another few weeks before the weather happened to be good enough that I was sitting in a doorless, small, single-engined airplane, Cessna 206 for anyone who's into airplanes, 2,200 feet above the Perthshire countryside, looking down on all the autumn colours. And you can ask me some questions. I'll continue the story if you like. I'll pause there. So that is how I ended up doing one parachute jump.
So I need to recap a little bit.
Okay.
So when you were a child, you discovered you were afraid of heights.
Mm-hmm.
And then for some reason, then you decided you're going to join the Air Cadet.
That's right.
And then you got to university. You were wanting to get on the field hockey team, but ended up at a table that was about parachute jumping.
That's right.
And then found yourself on a plane with no doors, looking down.
That's right. That's right.
What was going through that first jump?
Yeah.
Because you haven't experienced the jump at this point, right? So what was that? Do you remember what that?
One of the things I do remember is there was a couple of weeks between the training that I did and the jump.
Yep.
So the training was for a whole day. And one of the key things about training, skydiving, parachute training of any kind, is repetition. So especially doing a first jump, if anyone has watched any old movies where there is some military parachute jumping going on and people are getting kind of barked at and they're shouting things back and doing things over and over again, it's really similar. Basically being trained to do something, and the training is really based on getting stuff into your brain so that you will do it almost automatically. So one of the things you're trained to do on the ground is to jump out of something called a mock-up, which is basically a wooden model of an airplane, and it's just a little bit higher than, say, a desk, and you push yourself off onto the ground, and then you go into your kind of stable position that you should be in when you jump out of the airplane. So you kind of go into this big star position and push your pelvis forward, and you shout 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, and then you look around and you go, check canopy. Because by the time you've counted to 5,000, then that automatic parachute opening has happened, and you should be able to look up and see your parachute that's slowing you down. And if it's not, then you also train some emergency drills. Everything is along the same veins. So there I was, 2,000 feet above the Perthshire countryside, and I was there with some other University Parachute Club friends. There was 4 or 5 of us doing our first jump, and the instructor and the pilot. I was quite enjoying this ride in this little airplane, seeing the scenery, and then it kind of climbed up to the right height, and then it leveled off and just started flying in a straight line, turning around, and then what's called running in to drop us in the right place where the parachutes enter. And bearing in mind, the repetition training is all about 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000. So the first person, I'm kind of facing the back of the plane, actually, with my legs kind of near the open door. And the first person to go gets kind of shuffled into the door by the instructor. And they're kind of sitting on the edge of the door, and they're ready to go. And the instructor says to them, go. And what I hear is 1,000. And that was it. Because unlike on the ground, when you can hear people shouting and they're just standing there shouting from 1,000 to 5,000, in the air, they drop away. So all you can hear is 1,000. And it was a state, I was in such a hyped up state that I burst out laughing. I thought it was hilarious. That this, I was like, wow, this is so funny. They've just disappeared. And then you can kind of see their parachute opening. I think I was the third or fourth person. So that amusement, that hilarious moment about people disappearing and only hearing 1,000 started to dissipate a little bit. And it was my turn to be brought into the door. And I was sitting, so you've got like one bum cheek on, imagine having one bum cheek on the edge of your kitchen table or desk, but instead of a nice wood floor or carpet underneath your feet, there's nothing for 2,000 feet. And there's lots of noise and lots of wind. But your training takes over and you do what you're told or what you've been trained to do. And you can feel like lots of adrenaline. So I remember being told, go, and then pushing out of the airplane. And again, saying 1,000, 2,000. And then for about, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, I didn't remember anything between then and being under the parachute. But then I did remember like floating down under the parachute, doing a parachute landing fall on the ground, picking up my stuff. I'd like to do that again. The bit about not remembering is such a sensory overload that I think your brain just kind of shuts down. And yeah, just over the course of the next couple of weeks, almost at random moments, little bits would pop back into my mind till my brain, and this is common to everyone, I think, having shared the story, the brain starts to put the movie back together until you've got almost all of the frames. Some of it is still missing, so like basically a white space between doing it and remembering it. There was just this kind of whiteout in my mind. But I remember distinctly landing and going, "That was fun. I'm going to do it again." Now, your question, I think, was it a scary thing? It wasn't really. It wasn't. It certainly wasn't the scariest thing I'd ever done in my life. Do you want to know what the scariest thing I've ever done in my life was, and still is?
Was it telling your mom that you went skydiving?
Maybe that's the third thing. That's a whole separate episode and story. And
Okay,
I have told my mum about this. She might be listening. We'll maybe get her on as a guest and she can tell the story. The second scariest thing was the second parachute jump.
Because the first time you didn't know what you didn't know.
I didn't know. And then my mind and body certainly knew what was coming for the second time. And I was like, here's the first lesson, Danny, I think. And I only recently came across a great way to kind of sum this up. And it's, you've got to see it to be it. I might have mentioned it in a previous episode. By the time of even my first parachute jump, because I fully committed to the idea of doing a parachute jump and therefore got fully involved in the parachute club, and it's both weekend parachute activities and weekday social activities, shall we say. I had seen not just what it might be like to do one parachute jump and raise money for charity and just kind of tick that box, but I'd also seen that, well, that was a static line jump. So if I wanted to fulfill that and answer that question of was I capable of free falling out of a plane and saving my own life, then I would need to do more than one. I would need to do about 10 because I needed to complete the static line progression so that I could pull a handle while a parachute was opening automatically and then progress to actually doing that for real. So I started to see what I needed to do. At the same time, I'd also seen what was beyond that. I remember the first night I turned up to the parachute club social evening during the week. There was 3 or 4 of the university parachute club had just come back from California, and they were more experienced than I was. They were a few years ahead of me, and they'd gone off and had a 2-week skydiving holiday in California, and they showed us some videos of them falling through the sky, and they looked like they were having lots of fun. They were jumping out of airplanes at 12,000 feet over the Californian countryside and falling together and just having lots of fun. I remember one person who became a really good friend, my friend Phil, he basically sat down with me in the university union bar at the parachute club evening, and he basically said, okay, so look at my watch, and as it ticked over to the 12, the second hand, he said, we've just jumped out together, and we're over this amazing countryside, we're in this nice warm air, there's 3 of us, and we kind of jump out of the plane separately, then we fly to each other and hold our hands. Oh, it still falling. And he kept telling me the story of what it was like to fly, and they'd been falling for 60 seconds, and it seemed like a lifetime. I couldn't believe that you can actually jump out of an airplane and fly your body, and open a parachute. Between getting out and opening a parachute, it was a whole minute. It just blew my mind. So that inspired me. And when I say got to see it to be it, that was the first thing that really grabbed my attention, that was something that maybe I could do. Then I went to the parachute club, did the training. In between doing the training and doing my jump, I was up every weekend or so and learning how to do different things like pack the parachute. I also start to see what other people could do, because there was video screens in the parachute center, and it showed people who'd come back from other trips, or even people who'd just done jumps at the center I was at, and they were doing like jumping with not just 2 or 3 people, but 10 or 12, or in some cases like 40 or 50 or 60, if they had been jumping abroad. So I could see what was possible, and I was starting to build a picture of, well, I'm pretty sure I want to do one. I'm going to do one. And I'm pretty sure I want to scratch that itch and answer that question of whether I could actually have jumped out of the plane and saved my life as an air cadet. But I'm pretty sure now I've heard about it and seen it. I really want to go and do this free fall thing and jump with other people and learn what it's like to do that. That seems like really cool. So that was lesson, I guess, kind of in retrospect, a bit like when we talked about your design school lessons. None of these things were really occurring to me at the time, but in hindsight, the reason that I kept going was because I could see what was possible.
Just want to take a beat. So the first lesson is, this is, by the way, just really fascinating, because I'm obsessed with both flying airplanes and I've always wanted to go skydiving.
Okay.
From that element, just really fascinating.
Yeah.
So you said that the first lesson is you got to see it to be it. So how do you bring that into business?
Yeah, good question. Working in the field of design and design thinking, I think having, and perhaps in New Zealand, it's less likely that you will work for somebody who has been there and done it.
At the level that you're working at, right?
Exactly. At our career stage, when we're, we're, I guess, leading activities, leading design, it's more likely that we'll be in the position of working for people and working with our peers who haven't experienced what we've experienced before. So that thought occurred to me, and actually it's one of the reasons that I guess, I don't know about you, but I pay attention to what's happening in other countries from a design point of view, and stay in touch with people in other organizations and listen to podcasts. I'm kind of, that my version of, for me, seeing it to be it. I'm like drawing on other people's experience and replicating them. But then it also tells me that what we can do as a sort of mid-career, or the stage we're at, is we can be that other people see so that they can be it. And I think seeing it to be it could be also, I see that, I don't want to be that. So it could be that you see something and it's this crystallization, it's this, literally sometimes seeing someone and deciding that that's your role model, or the opposite, seeing somebody and going, well, that's my anti-role model. I don't want to, whether for better or worse, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, that's just something or somebody I don't want to be like. I want to be like that person instead. So yeah, that's kind of how I think about how it might apply to work. And also, especially if you're in a leadership position, always be thinking to yourself, who am I being for somebody who is seeing me, that they might not even tell me that they're my, or
this is something that we don't talk about a lot in leadership, is that you are, whether you like it or not, you are a role model. And somebody is watching you and either going, that is who I want to emulate. Or somebody is watching you and going, that is not what I want to do.
Yeah.
I think the other way that this lesson applies in business, because when you first said it, what came to mind for me was we spend a lot of time talking about things in organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And in design, sometimes it's actually about showing, to show me it, because I think that gets results faster. So sometimes cutting down the dialogue and painting the picture, this is prototypes and visuals are really effective. If you can create the picture of this is what it could be, And maybe people decide, well, that's really great, but that's not where we want to go, or we're not ready to go there, but at least they can get steps towards what could be.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay.
But the next one that comes to mind is this idea of finding your people, being part of a community, and the power of that. I'm going to say the power of quite a few times, I think, because some of these are really new at the time. But this next one is finding your people and being part of a community. What I really loved about turning up to the university parachute club and then going to the actual parachute club and then continuing on in the sport of skydiving was that it was literally in every one of those groups, the diversity was incredible. So I would turn up to the parachute club at the weekend. There would really be a cross section of society there. There'd be people who were lawyers, surgeons, electricians, plumbers. There were students like me. Everyone in between, everybody, and all sorts of different backgrounds, all sorts of different, views, just diversity, full stop. But what everybody had in common was this slightly unusual desire to jump out of airplanes, and it was that kind of that common thing that obviously, maybe it is really obvious, but it's that common desire and need and activity unite everybody. Even, there's lots of different types of skydiving and as a sport or as an activity, and within that kind of large group of skydivers, lots of subgroups, really interesting anthropologically. But during and before, during and after a day of skydiving, everyone always had that thing in common. So yeah, find your people and maybe pay more attention to what you've got in common than less attention to what's different. And how does that apply to business? You're going to ask me that, aren't you? I think it applies to business especially, but most kind of aspects of life, but business especially, and especially as designers or design thinkers, I think it's important to try and, like, when you turn up to an organization or you're brought into an organization, in my experience anyway, there's always people who are, inverted commas, your people. Go and find the skydivers. They won't be walking around with parachutes on their back. People who are, again, designers, they might be obvious from their role titles, maybe not. They're unlikely to be obvious as design thinkers, but you will find them in an organization. You'll find the people who talk about not just going off and delivering a solution, but instead taking a step back and up and going, what's the problem we're trying to solve in the first place? The people who come to you and draw you a picture, or the people who turn up and go, well, should we try an experiment? Find your people.
Because your people may not be wearing the labels that you expect them to be.
Yeah.
This is particularly if you are working for a large organization with thousands and thousands of people, it's very easy to get lost in that.
Yeah.
To finding your little tribe within.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the reason to do that, I suppose, is because it's always better to be with other people who have the same kind of worldview, approach to life, or in this case, work, and to discovering and solving problems, because it's energizing to do that. When I was skydiving, I used to look forward to the weekends because I'd be with my people for a couple of days and then I'd go back to the real world for 5 days, use some of that energy to do work and be different and show other people it's okay to be different in the real world. And I think the same thing applies within an organization. Find your people and recharge and replenish. Go back out to people who aren't your people yet, but might be. And this lesson I'm about to tell you is one that just occurred to me. It's one that took me a while to get over. Don't do that to the extent that you're maybe dismissing or alienating the others. So it's really easy to, when you're part of a really strong group with an unusual kind of common thing that they like to do, to see other people as
others.
It's like easy to do to othering. And we definitely did that as a group of skydivers. They probably still do. I'm actually one of the people that I would have used to look upon and go, we would call them woofos. So woofo is like, woofo, you want to jump out of a plane. So that was our nickname for people who didn't jump out of an airplane. We called them woofos. And I distinctly remember flying over on the way to altitude, things like, we'd call it Mitre 10 or Bunnings here, but, B&Q in the UK, and looking down and shaking my head and feeling sorry for the people who were spending their Saturdays in the DIY store.
And look at you now.
Look at me now, spending Saturday afternoons in the DIY store quite happily, actually. So yes, I guess that's the kind of cautionary opposite to finding your people, is make sure that you don't dismiss, alienate. You might find a better word for that, Danny.
The way I think about it is you find your people, but there's billions of people on the planet, right? So your people, your tribe is always growing.
Yeah. Oh, so nice.
Make sure that your tribe has space and room to grow.
Yeah. Invite others in. And also, I think, find the commonality with other tribes.
It's always looking for the common, because humans, we have so much more in common.
Yeah.
We are told or shaped to believe.
Yeah.
If you could focus on finding one thing, that one thing spirals into other things, and then you end up finding your podcast co-host.
Yeah.
And sometimes, you're like, it's been great knowing you, but this is probably it. I'm just not that into you.
It's not the final episode, is it? So find your people. The next lesson was very much a personal one. And I was determined to do free fall, which was pulling the ripcord and opening a parachute myself. But I was also petrified of, as it turned out, not just of heights when I'm on top of a building, but petrified of falling out of an airplane, even though there was a parachute that would open automatically on my back. So it took me quite a long time to go from being a static line jumper to a free fall parachute jumper. And even in my early free falls, I still had to overcome that fear of dying, basically. To put it bluntly, I was scared of dying. I used to, like a moth to a flame, or I'm not sure what, probably some sort of addict. I used to find myself going up to the parachute club on a Saturday morning when it was on a train or catching a lift with somebody, and I'd be kind of looking at the weather, secretly hoping that it would be too windy or too cloudy to actually jump out of airplanes, even though I actually wanted to jump out of airplanes. A very strange situation. And I used to also go home on a Sunday evening and go, what have I got myself into?
So the lesson?
The lesson is the power of self-talk, and in particular visualization, because I finally overcame this fear. It was actually just after reading Chuck Yeager's autobiography. So you probably know who Chuck Yeager is, Danny. So Chuck Yeager, for those who don't, was the person that, on the record books for breaking the sound barrier for the first time in an aircraft. He was a very famous American test pilot. Was only not one of the first astronauts into space because he didn't have an official college degree, but he was more than qualified to go into space. Anyway, his autobiography was called The Right Stuff. He talks about his confrontation with fear almost on a daily basis, and his cool, calm, collected approach to not necessarily overcoming that fear, but managing that. It's like being scared and doing it anyway. So it sounds really simple, but it was a bit more complicated. But basically, I started to realize that I could tell myself the same things. I realized that I could, instead of talking to myself and talking about being scared and imagining things going wrong when I fell out or jumped out of the airplane, I could imagine the opposite just as easily. So I actually put a poster together and put it in the back of my door of my room, so that every time I came to open the door to go out, I would see it, and all it said was The Right Stuff. That was it. Nothing to do with New Kids on the Block. Thank you. Got my pop reference there. It was The Right Stuff. So I basically told myself over and over again that I had the right stuff to do what I wanted to do, which was to free fall out of an airplane. And through the help of the other skydivers who recognized that I was struggling, they would help me, and they taught me how to visualize. And there's more visualizing later on in the story. in really simple terms, I would close my eyes and imagine myself doing a really good jump because I had the right stuff. So,
I
yeah,
love
power
that.
of self-talk.
I love that. But I also heard another lesson in there that I
Oh,
think
yeah.
we need to talk
Okay.
about, which was you just said other skydivers saw me struggling.
Yeah.
And there's two sides to that. This is particularly important in leadership. Is there's that element of we see people struggling and what do we do? But
Yeah.
also as a leader, you struggle silently rather than
Mm-hmm.
going, who
Mm-hmm.
are the people that can help me?
Mm-hmm.
In that moment, people saw you were struggling and they
Yeah.
could offer to help you, but you had to be willing to take the help.
Yeah. That's true. I was more than willing to accept that help and shout out to all those people that did help me. My friends who probably will listen to this.
Do you say who probably won't listen to this?
Well, I don't think. Well, actually, maybe they will. But everyone, there's too many people to list. Actually, anyway, some people did recognize I was struggling, and they helped me significantly. But
Okay,
yes,
so next.
yeah. Next lesson. Where do we go next? Well, I discovered early on that this was more than just jumping out of airplanes and saving your life, or pretending to be a paratrooper or anything like that, or just it was a sport, and you could compete in it, and you know. It sounds really obvious, but if you applied yourself and practiced it, you could get better and better at it. The beauty of skydiving as a sport, I think, is still, and I see this as a positive, is relatively small. There's not that, as a proportion of the world, there's not that many people who want to do it. And that means that the people who are at the very top of the sport, the world champions, to make a living, they teach other people. They have to, and they want to actually. They want to coach others to emulate and one day kind of overtake them as the champions. So I used to describe this as it would be like learning golf from Tiger Woods, but that's a bad analogy.
That did not age well.
No, it did not age well. Also, I think I realized that Tiger Woods probably isn't a great coach, whereas there's something about, I'm sure it applies to other sports, but there's something about skydiving. I think it's to do with the fact that it's not really a physical thing, it's a mental thing. You have to be a good communicator as well. That's another lesson. And that means that if you're a good communicator and you're good at learning and you can translate your learning into somebody else's, then you can also teach people. So we got to learn from world champions, and one of my early experiences of that was going over to Arizona and Eloy, a tiny little place in Arizona in America, and learning from people who were at that point the world champions, a team called Arizona Airspeed, who were mythical for how they'd evolved as a team, and we got to learn their kind of their way of doing things. And one of the things there was this learning cycle, and they described it as PEDL, or PEDL, or plan, execute, debrief, and learn. I think since I first came across that, then I've tried to use it as much as possible in the workplace. So I tried to turn everything into a learning cycle. I believe that PEDL actually came from the American military, and they still use it. But the idea is that you don't just plan something, you actually go and do it, and you don't just do it, but actually, and this is the real key, is you pause once you've done that and you debrief. In other words, get together as an individual or as a group and go, right, what did we plan to do? What did we actually end up doing? What was the difference between those two things? What went well, what didn't go well? And then the fourth kind of key part is, what did we learn? So therefore, what we're going to keep doing, what we're going to stop doing, what we're going to try and do better. So this whole learning cycle was a real kind of mind opener for me. And you can organize anything around that kind of learning cycle. But the important things are the planning and the learning. I kind of attached to that or associated with that that particular lesson is this idea of kind of rituals. So we would begin and end a day of skydiving as a team. As a team, we would get together at the beginning of the day and we'd, have a quick plan of what we're going to do. And at the end of the day, our ritual, we would close out the day as a team and say, we've done this, we've done that, we've learned this, we've learned that. This is what we're going to keep doing tomorrow. This is what we're going to not do. This is how we're going to get better. It's like a cycle of continuous improvement, anchored in the ritual of getting together at the beginning of the day and getting together at the end of the day. The way that applies to business, and I still do this with teams that I lead and help, is We don't necessarily do it at the beginning and end of each day, because a day at work isn't the same as a day on a skydiving camp. But we definitely do it at the beginning and end of each week by saying, what we're going to do together this week on a Monday morning, and then at the end of Friday afternoon, what did we do? Did we do what we wanted to do? If we did, why? If we didn't, why? What we're going to carry on to next week. So there's that learning cycle and the rituals combined, which I think that both those things are scalable from the kind of nano, as a person, an individual, but also to a whole organization.
Absolutely. In organizations, planning is an interesting one, because I feel like there's either a failure to plan or perpetual planning, where you're just planning, refining the plan, but then not actually doing anything.
Yeah.
And then there is the bucket of execute, deliver, but never really going, hang on, what did we say we were going to do? That debriefing, that taking time to debrief, reflect, and think about, are we doing the right things? Are we doing them in the right way? Do we have the right? Those things tend to lack.
Yeah. And kind of one of the ways we, especially in those early training camps, and as I became more ambitious in my skydiving, I moved on from the fear of falling or fear of dying to the fear of failing. It became much more about a mental game of, I want to perform the best I possibly can, especially when you start jumping with other people, and especially as you build formations with other people, whether it's just for fun or for the challenge, or laterally, I got into competitive skydiving. I'd actually met my partner Susan at the University Parachute Club, and the two of us started to form teams with other people to do competitive skydiving, and a lot of that was built around getting coaches from, I guess, the top of the sport to help us. So one of the rituals, the debriefing and the learning, and actually planning, executing, tended to happen with a coach. So after a training competition skydive where four of us had jumped out of an airplane with a fifth person who was part of the team filming us, we'd come down from that jump and we'd land, and they'd plug the video camera into the TV, and we'd gather around, and with the coach sitting by us, we would watch the skydive that we'd just done. And the coach would help us pick out some good things and pick out some things that we wanted to work on. And then we'd go back and usually repeat exactly the same jump, looking to improve it there and then we'd move on to another jump. So that, I guess, another lesson here is having a coach can often be invaluable. And I know in organizations, a lot of rituals and learning cycles and coaches are part of newer ways of working. A well implemented agile work system incorporates all of those. A lesson I have and a frustration I have is when budgets start to get cut and we get rid of people who seem to be just doing fringe jobs, like coaches, for example, or agile team facilitators or scrum masters. That frustrates me, because actually, even though they might not be doing the work, they're as equally valuable. They're invaluable to the work that's being done. And the people who seem, job titles seem to be providing more value are actually doing the doing. Because our coach wasn't part of our team. They weren't jumping in the air with us. They couldn't talk to us anyway. They were helping us perform the best we could by helping us go through the cycles and using those rituals to best effect.
As someone who's had, actually in fitness coaching, and then also someone that's had a leadership coach, it is something that we all need to invest more in, because it is, like you said, invaluable. Everybody has blind spots that keep us from progressing and getting to the next level of whatever it is we're pursuing. It reminds me of something that I always come back to, is that we don't succeed alone.
Yeah. Definitely
Right.
not.
Okay.
Definitely not. All right. I've got a couple more. One of them, aim to be the best. Don't aim for a gold medal. If you aim to be the best that you can be, either as an individual or as a team or broader, then you might not win a gold medal, but you'll be the best that you can be. Whereas if you aim for the gold medal, then you probably won't get the gold medal. You'll focus too much on the
prize. You don't necessarily control getting the medal.
Yeah, exactly.
But you have absolute control about training yourself to be the best.
That's exactly it, Danny. You could turn up to a competition at any level, whether it's local, national, international, world meet, and the other team that you're competing against in skydiving anyway, they might just do better than you, and you have absolutely no control of that whatsoever. So focus on being the best that you can be,
How do
and
you
don't
bring that
focus
to
on,
business?
well, as an organization, don't in relation to another organization, do set your goals around being the best version of that particular organization you can be. As a small team, which is maybe where we're thinking more, yeah, I think, well, maybe in more modern terms, thinking about objectives and key results, I guess what we're saying here is really focus on the key results because they will lead you to the objective. Start with key results, work on those, and the objective will take care of itself. Don't do it the other way around. If you focus on the objective, then you won't get there, if that makes sense.
Yep. Okay, so
The final lesson is go with, well, the power of visualization. And I guess it's related to the self-talk thing of having the right stuff. But as I got more and more into, especially the world of competition skydiving, and back in those days, there was no such thing as vertical wind tunnels. So again, in those days, if you wanted to be the best golfer or cyclist, then you could just go out and golf balls at the driving range, or you could get on your stationary bike, or even go for a bike ride whenever you wanted. Whereas, in a competition skydive, the time you have to score points is 35 seconds. In a training jump, you might have like a minute or minute and 10 seconds if you get out of the plane a lot higher, and that was the training time. And there's a limit both in terms of time available during the day to do that over and over again, and also it's quite expensive, so you were limited by how much you could afford to budget and time wise to do. And yet it's a sport that you need to repeat over and over again to build muscle memory, to build communication with your team, just to get better and better at. So what we were taught to do, what we learned to do, was use the free and almost as effective training tool of visualizing. So I'm sure, know this, visualizing something as in picture it, closing your eyes, and if you are able to imagining it happening, and if you're imagining doing something athletic or using your body, your brain pretty much believes you're doing it. I think it's 80 or 85% is effective in terms of building muscle memory if you visualize doing something. So we would shut our eyes and spend hours, instead of watching TV, we would shut our eyes and imagine doing particular skydiving maneuvers. And we would build up the ability to essentially watch a video in our minds from different points of view, whether it's from our own first person point of view within the skydive or from a third person point of view looking above it. And getting even more advanced, we'd learn to kind of go backwards and forwards through that tape. I guess when it comes to business, the key skill, I guess, within the skill that we learned was often our brains would visualize and imagine things going wrong. Your naughty brain would go, oh, well, I don't want to be doing that. You just yourself following the bad edit rather than the good one. So what you do is train yourself to pause that video, do something to let go of that and reset and start again. Often the one I like the best actually is imagining having an unhelpful visualization or thought and tying a piece of string to it. The other end of the string is a balloon filled with helium, and you basically let that thought go. Or another one is, as we call it, a reset, and we use this during the skydive sometimes as well. Imagine there's a big red button on top of your head, and you want to reset your thinking, or you imagine, or literally press the top of your head, you've reset it, you've started again. And the way that you can use all of this for in work for any business is, as an individual and as a team, if you learn it together, is you can imagine, we have choice in life as humans. We can imagine the worst happening, we can imagine the best happening, we can mentally rehearse something. Where I started to apply it was in work and mentally rehearsing like a meeting or a presentation, or more laterally, I often will mentally rehearse and visualize a workshop that I'm running, and I'll rehearse small segments of it. I'll rehearse all sorts of different things about it. I'm playing movies in my mind, and that means that when I step into that scenario, then I'm more likely to, not guaranteed to, but more likely to perform in the way that I want to perform, whatever it is that I'm performing. So I think there's a huge untapped power for most of us in this idea of pausing, closing our eyes, getting ourselves into the right state to imagine something happening in the future, aka visualizing. As an aside to that, I've actually learned and actually met a couple of people who, I can't remember what the term for it is called, but their brains don't actually work in this way, so they can't close their eyes and literally can't imagine a picture in their minds. Maybe you know more about it than I do. I think what you could do is almost talk it through in your head rather than imagine it through in your head.
It's whatever that works for you, right? Sometimes it is like literally talking to yourself. Sometimes it is imagining it. But the whole point of this is to frame your mind around something happening that you want to happen, right?
Yes.
And a specific example of the power of visualization, there's a lot happening at the moment in organizations where we all talk about, it seems like we're not having the difficult conversations we need to be having, whether it's performance, whether it's budgets, whatever it is. This is a really useful exercise for that.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes we build in our minds how terrible. I'm not going to talk about this because it's all just going to go terribly wrong. But what if you could take the time to actually visualize or talk yourself through that hard conversation? And when you do that, you frame it so that it goes well. And then you teach yourself, well, am I being curious? Am I being open? Am I being kind? But you walk through that.
Yeah, exactly. Love it.
This has been amazing. I feel like we could talk for 10 hours on the amazing lessons. But to wrap it up, so you told us about how you started in skydiving.
Mm-hmm.
I know that this is not an activity that you partake in anymore. So what's it been like walking away from that?
Oh, really difficult to begin with, actually. This might be a whole other episode on going through on like identity and being comfortable with not doing something. I'm always saying for the time being, not necessarily anymore. I made a conscious decision though. For me, there's a whole other lesson in calculated risk taking. Maybe episode 2 or 3. But the risk equation for me, when I balanced the rewards I was getting from skydiving, where it started to become outweighed by the risk for me. And there's a whole bunch of, like I say, there's a story behind both of those sides of the equation. So I decided to hang up my parachute temporarily and go and try and find other things to do that satisfied me in the same way. I tried paragliding. That was fun, but individual. I've not yet come across the same. I guess for me now, work is the environment in which I have the most opportunity to practice teamwork and some of these lessons that I've learned from getting in touch with nature and activity point of view, surfing or paddleboarding. These days, I get a similar kind of enjoyment from that. What was it like walking? It was tough to walk away, but because I made the decision, then I made it slightly easier. It was adjusting back into the real world was a bit of a journey.
There's got to be another episode on this around redefining who you are.
Definitely. And I think the lesson we can discuss in that episode is, as designers and design thinkers within an organization, just like skydivers in society, we are quite different, as we have discovered and we will discover. And it's being that different person in whatever way, in combination with seeing things differently, and in combination with, and I think this is where the real lesson comes, is like none of us are our jobs. We might be design thinkers, and we might think of ourselves as designers. It's really important to maybe continue to embody that, but also realize that that doesn't mean that if design or designers or design thinkers aren't wanted or needed or are appreciated in an organization, that means that you yourself are not appreciated, valued, or wanted in an organization or anywhere else.
And one of the great things about the modern world is that we are living longer. And so with that comes this opportunity to continuously redefine each other and ourselves. The world around us is changing, and we make choices about our lives and the things we're going to do that require us to then redefine who we are as well. I think that is a great way to end.
It sounds like it.
Any last bits that you want to share before we close out?
two phrases. I won't elaborate on them into lessons, but two phrases that I try and use all the time. One is rest is part of training. So I fully learned that in we couldn't skydive all day, every day. And actually, if you had a day off in the middle of a training camp, then you came back a lot stronger and sharper. And the last one is one of the most amazing people in the world, full stop, an amazing, very famous person in skydiving. He's a world champion multiple times. Is a guy called Dan Brodsky Chenfield. He's got a TED Talk and a book, actually, and it's called Above All Else. So I'd highly recommend, if any of this has become interested anybody, go and read and watch that. He tells his story, which is to mine, but also very different to mine, far more inspiring. Go and watch that. But he coached me a few times, me and Susan and some others, and his attitude to training and competition was basically what you do in competition is a direct reflection of what you do in training. So therefore, when you train and you're training for competition, and don't change anything when you go to the competition. Don't try and do anything differently. Don't change anything. Just do it the way you've trained it. And his way of summarizing that was, don't even get a haircut. Like, change nothing. Don't even get a haircut. I don't know how this applies to work, so I'm not going to try, but I always remember him saying, don't even get a haircut. Just keep things the same.
Well, I think there's a lot you can take away from that. The way you practice it, that's about being deliberate about how you practice, because that is how you're going to do it on the day.
That's right.
So, nice.
We'll stop there because I could keep going on to the next 6 lessons, but we'll stop there. Thank you for listening, Danny.
This has been really cool. Thank you for sharing your story, and thanks, listeners, for tuning in to this, again, a different kind of episode. So we're always experimenting on the podcast, and look forward to seeing what you all think.
Yeah.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Danny. 1,000.